Hey guys, welcome back to Altaz-Review, where we talk about all kinds of gaming opinions. With the steadily evolving horror genre, I think we need to start identifying what makes a good horror game a good scary horror game. And to that end, I want to talk about layers of fear. Considering Bloober Team will be working on the upcoming Silent Hill game, I think it should be the main focus of this discussion. Layers of Fear recently got a remake/reboot, and I've generally seen Layers of Fear to be regarded as one of the best horror experiences. But I think it fails to accomplish true horror, even at a basic level. Like some of the other titles by Bloober Team, Layers of Fear finds it difficult to put horror and gameplay elements together. So today we're gonna look at what Layers of Fear seems to be missing in the original and now in the remake. Layers of Fear is one of the most well-known horror games that uses psychological horror as its main tool. But it can be considered as famous or infamous depending on who you ask. It understands how to employ horror elements and takes advantage of its medium to create cinematic horror experiences using gameplay. But Layers of Fear focuses only on the end result. There are many different types of horror games. Games like Resident Evil are scary because enemies are large in number and some encounters are challenging while facing a terrifying enemy. It may not always be scary, but the experience is fun as a game while also maintaining a scary atmosphere and adding a few jump scares and horrific enemy designs. Here, the game holds on to horror using the atmosphere. In another example, we have the Outlast games. Outlast is mostly cinematic with a few interactions to learn about the story, but you're always running from some kind of enemy. There's no combat, so you feel relief in knowing that running away is the only option, without the stress of managing some kind of ammo. But in Outlast 2, we saw a drift in that format. It had a lot of creepy or jump scare moments that didn't serve the story or create a build-up, but it still tried to use the story and environment to add to the experience. Layers of Fear suffers heavily from the same mistake. The game is so focused on creating the scare that it ignores the when, where, and how of horror. It has a story, but the surrounding area rarely has anything to do with the dialogue or the information you find. The objectives are eerie at first, but immediately become a predictable chore. In the first hour, the game seems disorienting in a scary way, but it later becomes disorienting in an annoying way. For context, the game starts you off in a large mansion. It's a well-made and detailed environment, and every cabinet, drawer, and door is interactable. It seems interesting. But moving forward, the game never adheres to a consistent map of the area. You don't know where you are or where you're going. It's a waste of a well-made environment that would have been interesting to explore as the game went on. Similarly, the majority of doors and cabinets are locked and most of them are empty. Every time I checked, I thought maybe this time I'll find some Easter egg or another important piece of lore, but it's usually either locked or empty. There are also a handful of scary moments that are nothing more than just moments. It's not embedded into the story or special to the setting. As you reach the end of a hallway and turn around to find the environment has changed, it feels unsettling and confusing. You can't trust anything. And this scare feels like a build-up. What else is going to betray your expectations? What other tricks are there? But that's just the end of it. The rest of the game continues to use the reach the last door and turn around trick. So I found myself robotically sprinting to the door at the end of the hall and immediately turning around to sprint to the next door, which will again require me to turn around. It feels like the door opening mechanic was just replaced by the turning around trick. There are other scary moments too. Objects fly and sounds echo from the walls, but without any threats or connection to the story, there's no worry. A horror game can use gameplay or cinematics to feel scary, but Layers of Fear has no objectives or characters, so there's no cinematic scares and the gameplay has no tension. You know nothing can hurt you, and the lack of any physical ghost or even a creepy character means the scariest things you'll face will be a flying chair. The psychological part of the scares focus on disorientation, changing environments, molding the walls, and breaking structures. The setting becomes so violently manipulated that you can't make sense of what's in front of you, and that's not necessarily scary. In the same way that abstract art isn't exactly scary, but that's what the game looks like for the last few hours. Just some abstract blend of wood and concrete that you have to walk through like a hallway. The vague objectives have you navigating wherever the path will lead you until you find a room that seems vaguely important. And at the end of your objective, you'll find a jar with some kind of body part in it, like a finger. It's an unsettling reveal as the narrator speaks up and explains the story behind what you just found and narrates what happened in this mansion. But even these reveals don't last long, because once again, the trope is repeated too often. You realize the next 5 unsettling objectives will require you to find some human-based part, blood, hair, nails, or something to that effect. It's scary the first 2 times, but it later becomes the same as a fetch quest from an RPG. Even finding an enemy stops being scary after the first time. My first time finding a female ghost in the darkness was terrifying, but with no other path, I walked into it just to see what would happen. And after a horrific death, I found that I didn't just respawn, I actually advanced to the next area. So it set a standard. The next time I found the ghost, I ran into her knowing she was the equivalent of a door to the next area. Within an hour of playing, the shifting walls, the turning around at the door and finding some finger in a jar doesn't keep the same scare. And this is mostly because I couldn't connect it to the narrative. The gameplay focuses entirely on what might seem scary, and the story vaguely describes a simplistic plot that might have served as a good script if the game lasted less than an hour, which isn't really an insult. The entire setup feels like an experiment to see what players might find scary, and if they can piece together the unsettling events of the story. This kind of experimental title should be shorter and needs to connect gameplay and story in a way that makes at least one of those things focus on horror and not just random jump scares. The sequels, along with the remake, addressed a few issues, but these changes don't really change the overall experience. You still end up feeling the same way, except you have a great respect for the great graphics. Honestly, they used Unreal 5 really well in the remake. They added some level of combat by using a lamp that wards off the ghosts that show up every now and then. But that still doesn't add the tension of fear or loss. Dying or losing has no negative effect. Even just respawning would mean that you'd have to find a way around the enemy or run till you get to a checkpoint. But Layers of Fear has no balance in progression. You don't get to explore a properly defined area, and you just bounce around a randomly generated environment, while dying and progressing and getting lost all have the same effect. If a horror game doesn't use gameplay elements for horror, then it needs visual horror through some encounters or unique situations. Layers of Fear feels tiring and overuses some basic horror tropes without creating any level of commitment to the narrative or to the experience. There is no real reason to reach the end or to progress, because there's no unique moment in the game, and the story is basically a creepypasta with nothing more than a vague dialogue plaguing you as you walk around empty halls. The game does less than scaring you, it teaches you to ignore abstract and irrational fears. I didn't have to overcome Layers of Fear, I had to get it over with. A 4-hour game felt painfully long only halfway through. It may seem like a harsh critique, but considering that Layers of Fear tries the same thing as many other games, but misses so many basic ideas is inexcusable. An explorative first-person horror with no weapons is a very basic idea, but it generally works well enough. But Layers of Fear couldn't handle that format. Bloober Team has similar problems more or less in its other games. Observer overuses the psychology sections by making them more abstract and confusing rather than horrific and distressing. The medium also lacked horror elements in the gameplay. Even though it had enemies and puzzles, the player doesn't really feel the need to fear anything in the environment or any lurking evil. Given that story is the focus in Silent Hill, it might be a benefit to focus on psychological horror like they're used to, while connecting the scary moments to the well-defined story elements that Silent Hill is known for. Bloober Team is capable of using enemies and creating a coherent story, but they struggle to combine it with their ideas of horror. But Silent Hill might push them to put everything together in a good balance. Overall, I have high expectations of the new Silent Hill, and I think Layers of Fear is a good game to understand what kind of mistakes should be avoided. But that's my take on Layers of Fear and what I think a horror game should be. Maybe next time I'll talk about some horror games that set a good standard for the genre, at least in my opinion. But again, let me know what you guys think and what kind of games you guys want to hear about in the future. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. I hope I see you here again.